Welcome to Young Money with Tracy Bissett, the advice show for young millionaires in the making. It's time for some $1 Million Straight Talk with Tracy, President and Chief Financial Fitness Trainer at Bissett Financial Fitness. Each week, Tracy's going to tell you what you need to know now at the beginning of your earning curve. Basic and advanced financial concepts made clear, healthy money habits and the missteps to avoid, and all the stuff that you can do to set yourself up for a future of fantastic financial freedom. Ready to lace up and start this week's financial fitness training? Let's do it, Tracy.
Welcome to the Young Money Podcast. I'm really excited. We have a great guest today, Céline Williams. Welcome to the show, Céline.
Thanks so much, Tracy.
So Céline is an international speaker, business strategist, and expert in leadership development and communication for the 21st century workplace. She has over 15 years experience working with fast-growing organizations, small businesses, and entrepreneurs, and is a trusted advisor to Fortune 1000 companies and entrepreneurs alike. She is sought after for her expertise in accelerating performance, designing culture, improving emotional intelligence, and facilitating effective communication. She's been called a medicine woman for her ability to tap into and really understand all the aspects and layers of her clients and their businesses. This ability, along with a solid foundation of trust and rapport, enables her to go beyond the obvious and facilitate lasting change. She values connection, authenticity, communication, and innovation, and brings an unwavering sense of humor to everything that she does. So you've heard a little bit about Céline, so welcome again, Céline.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Well, it's fantastic. So I'd love it if you can start by telling us a little bit about your background. You've achieved a lot of success to date in your life, and really what led you to that success.
Sure. I love starting with the big questions. It's great. So the business I run now is the second business that I've owned on my own. I've also been a partner in 2 other businesses, and I worked in corporate for 11 years. So I keep telling everyone I'm still 30, and I'm going to just say I did a lot in my 30 years. That's what I'm going with. So I've done a number of different things. My degree is in English Lit, Sociology, and Anthropology. And I worked in health informatics, and I've run a tutoring company and a leadership development company. And the sort of thread through all of this has been, even the work I was doing in corporate, which was in this sort of techie space, was I was doing a lot of work with people and relationships and communication. And I've always been in positions and had opportunities to build on those skills. So when I started in corporate, I worked for a company that didn't have an HR team. And when we got an HR team, I got to help build that out and work with a company through a stage of rapid growth. And then I did project and change management, and I was out in different provinces around Canada, focusing on and helping their teams execute initiatives and get projects funded for the space that I was in.
And so when you say change management, just for those who may be listening who might not know exactly what that is, maybe you could explain that a little bit.
Totally. Great question. I sometimes forget that not everyone knows the jargon that we are so used to using in certain circles. So change management is basically helping organizations, teams, groups, whatever that looks like, through a period of change. You can't manage the change itself. What you're trying to do is work with the change that is happening to make it as effective as possible, to limit the amount of resistance and problems that come up, to address issues before they arise and have the process be as smooth as possible. And this is obviously when you know a change is coming, right? So when you know there's a new initiative or a new project or a new part of a company or a new team, things like that is when they'll bring people in to do change management with the group.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll
no
let you
problem.
carry on with your story.
So essentially I was doing that, and then I did stakeholder engagement, which means, and I will explain this one, I was working with decision makers around the country for making certain decisions in health for Canada. And I was, reaching out and dealing with those stakeholders and getting their buy-in and hearing what they had to say and learning about what their needs were, and then working with a group of them to come to decisions that worked, hopefully, for everyone. I did some work in communications as well, and then left that and started my business. And since then, I've been in the business I have now. And I was also working with a partner in a similar area, but slightly different for a while. And I am now just back to focusing on my business. And so it's been, like most of us, or like many of us, I wouldn't say most, kind of a windy road that is not necessarily as linear as we think it's going to be when we're 18 or 19 years old and starting school or our career or whatever the case may be.
And so, yes, you've accomplished a lot in your 30 years.
Thank you.
So we'll go with that. When you think about the windy road that you were on, are there some themes that emerge for you or some success factors that you think really stand out that helped you navigate that road and lead you to your next opportunity and to ultimately where you are now?
100%. I think the biggest one when I look back, and I can't underplay this, is relationships and building relationships. And I have gone through periods in my life where I was really good at staying on top of those. And I've gone through periods where I've not been as good as staying on top of those relationships. And you can define that whether it's relationships as in friendships, as in family relationships, as in business relationships, as in networking, however you want to define it, it's that relational aspect that has been a huge success factor. I've had a lot of opportunities based on word of mouth or people telling someone about me or hearing me do a thing. And that's all relationships. And so that I would say is probably the most consistent success factor that I've seen. I would also say that another one is a willingness to take calculated risk. So I don't want to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. You know what I mean? Like there's risk that doesn't seem to have a lot of upside. And then there's calculated risk where you're really taking a look at the potential, what could be, weighing out opportunities and risks and making decisions in an educated, smart, whatever you want to call it, manner. And I think that's been a big piece for me as well, is not being afraid to do something different just because it wasn't the quote unquote norm.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of guests on the show who tell us the same as you've just mentioned, and whether they're in their career or they're in their own businesses, and just figuring out what kind of makes sense. And if you think the risk is worth it and reasonable, then you're jumping ahead. And usually that takes you on paths you wouldn't have normally gone to.
100%. It's that factor of we can't predict the future. I mean, if anyone can find the psychic that can predict all of the future and tell us exactly what's going to happen, amazing. I want to meet that person and help them become a billionaire, because none of us can do that. So it is really doing our best with the information we have and taking those calculated risks and being open to things looking different than you think they're going to look. I think a lot of us get really attached to things being a certain way, or we have an idea of how the world works or how we work or whatever works. And it's often not that way.
Absolutely. I remember when I was young, I used to think when people weren't married, when they were kind of by 25, I thought, oh my gosh, that's like one of those milestones you have to hit, or you have to hit this kind of career level. And once you're out and you're finished school, you realize that it's not the case. Everybody's got to figure things out on their own, and being open to success looking differently than you might have imagined is really important.
100%. And managing the fact that sometimes you'll still get triggered or get into reaction when things aren't different, right? Like I have zero desire to, no offense to anyone who works for a company, I think it's wonderful. It's just not me. I like being able to impact people the way I do and work with different companies and work with individuals and all of that sort of thing. So I have no desire to be in the corporate ladder space. That mindset was part of how I was raised and what I saw as success for a long time. And I still have moments where I doubt myself and I'm like, is that a better way? Is that the safer route? Is that the whatever? So yes, being open to the change and also being gentle enough with yourself to recognize that sometimes you'll still get triggered by those things and it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And this interview is being recorded before we're going to air it. And we just gone through Bell Let's Talk Day, and certainly managing those triggers and those feelings that you have for yourself and taking care of yourself are all really important to make sure that you're not hurting your own life when you're doing the things that you're really truly meant to do.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So I love that. And I think it's great takeaways for the listeners. So those key success factors or themes you mentioned in your life, building the relationships, that willingness to take calculated risks, being open to change and then being really gentle with yourself with the triggers. So I appreciate you sharing that because you shared a lot of stories that are personal to you. So it's great when we can get some insights into our guests.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I love this. I love an opportunity to talk, Tracy.
Excellent. And so we're going to shift gears a little bit because I'd love to hear about your biggest financial challenge or something that you wish you had known earlier in your life when it comes to either business finances or personal finances.
So this is a great question. So I would say that, so the biggest financial challenge that I've had in my life, 100% came when I started my business. So I'll give you a little bit of context. So when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I started a tutoring company that I ran until my mid 20s. So just a few years ago, ended up selling the IP for it and blah, blah, blah. Then I went into corporate for a long time. So when I left corporate and I had the training to become an executive and leadership coach, and I had the training around some change management and different aspects of sort of the work that I do now, I was like, this is going to be easy. I had some money saved. I had a bit of a runway. It's like, this is going to be great. I'm going to start my business. I'm going to get a website up. I'm going to do the social media things. This is going to be a no-brainer. I'll just get out there and I'll find clients real easy.
Of course. They'd be waiting for you. They knew you were going to make a business.
Yeah, they were just going to knock on my door. They were just going to find me and knock on my door. And I know this will shock everyone. That's not what happened.
Really?
I know. I spent probably 10 months floundering around, spending my savings, thank God I had savings. And because otherwise I don't know where I'd be, because I had a mortgage and it was just, thank God I had savings. But I floundered. I didn't change how I was spending money. I was spending more money because now I was getting a website set up and trying different social media things and going to networking events and blah, 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 blah. So I was spending more money than I had been and making $0 and not targeting the right people. I wasn't clear on who I wanted to work with, what I really wanted to do. It was a disaster. And at the end of that 10 months, I then spent another 6 months getting small clients here and there. I was a little bit more focused, but basically still spending way more money than I was making, trying to figure out and rebrand and get really clear on what I was doing. And so the first 1.5 to 2 years of my business, I was making minimal amounts of money. And even after that, it still took another year to start really making decent money because I got clearer and got more focused and had more opportunities. And there's a runway time to build that up when you're starting from scratch. So that was sort of the biggest financial hit issue, whatever you want to call it, that I went through because I quite literally drained my savings. I had no savings. I was, borrowing from a line of credit. Again, thankfully I had savings to that I could come out of this with. And it's not like I ended up in $100,000 of debt, but I still ended up in debt.
For those listening, because she doesn't have a product-based business, that certainly would have been a lot worse. And you probably wouldn't have been able to sustain 3-4 years before you started making some decent money because you didn't need to invest in any inventory or any product with your service-based business.
100%. Yes. And that's a really great clarification to make. Having now worked with a number of startups who have products, it's a whole different beast when you have a product. It's a whole different beast in terms of runway, in terms of everything. So I was lucky and still managed to get myself in a bunch of debt that I had to deal with. And that was, I think, was sort of the biggest financial hardship, fully self-imposed due to a lack of planning, which I will acknowledge. And I learned a ton from in the end. But I would say that was sort of the biggest financial hardship I went through because recovering from that was not immediate. It's not like suddenly I had a month where I made $50,000 and paid everything off right away.
Yeah. And just to remind you even to be gentle with yourself, like you mentioned to us, because you did have some planning. I mean, the fact that you were able to go pretty much 10 months and still be using your savings is awesome because you obviously had saved up quite a bit of money.
Yes.
And so being able to sustain and eventually maybe finding clients that weren't your target, being able to make it to that 3rd, 4th year to be able to then kind of hit the traction, start making decent money. Like that's all all amazing. So congratulations.
Thank you. And yes, like I said, I'm very glad I had savings. I can't say enough for squirreling some money aside that is reasonable and ongoing. I literally had just automatic savings coming, like automatic amounts coming out of my account into a secret savings account, which saved me.
Excellent.
Seriously, if I had to outsmart myself, and it worked, so that's great. And yes, like I'm glad that I had done some of that planning, and also glad that I'm no longer in a position that I have that debt and that weight on my shoulders, because it is tough. And there's people who have so much more than what I had and have to deal with that. It's a tough thing. It is a weight.
Absolutely. And a study was just released last week by Myers Norris Penny, and the crux of the report is that 46% of Canadians are $200 or less away from being insolvent. So that's like a prescription, that's some groceries, that's an unexpected taxi or Uber ride you need to take. So that's a really scary thing. So there certainly are a lot of Canadians out there with a lot of debt that they're carrying, and all the stress and anxiety that goes along with it.
Wow, that's a shocking number.
Mm-hmm. Good on you for having the plan, outsmarting yourself, as you say it, because we talk a lot on the show about paying yourself first. As young as you can, start saving money, even if it's $10, $20 a month, just starting to do it and get in the habit so you're not used to having it all, so that when you need it, you do have it, which is great, like you did.
To what you were just saying, that's literally how I started. When I started working in a corporate setting and I was getting a paycheck just showing up in my bank account every month, which felt like a miracle to someone who'd run their own business before. I was like, what is this? This is magic. When that happened, within about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 6 months, I realized that I was just going to spend whatever was in my account. And I think I started with $25 or $50 every other week when I got paid. They got moved into my little squirrel account. And then the more money I made as my salary increased, I increased that amount. So it made a huge, by the end, I had enough that it sustained me through my tragic first year and a bit of business. Otherwise, I couldn't have done I couldn't have gone and started my own business without that padding.
When you started that, did someone give you the idea, or did you get that idea to do it?
That's a really good, I have to think back.
Like maybe people at work were talking about it. It's possible. Maybe your family. Or you just thought, I already lived that where I didn't have a lot of money around, so I'm going to do something different.
So I think it was not my family.
Okay.
It was definitely not my family talking about that. If memory serves, it was a friend of mine at work. And he was going through, he was significantly older than I was. I was in my early 20s, mid 20s-ish. And he was, I think he's like 18 years older than I am. We're still friends to this day. Mm-hmm. And he was going through a divorce at that point. As part of that, there's all the dividing of assets and things like that. And his lack of savings and the way that they had been spending money, had huge impacts on not only where he could live and what he could do, and selling the house and uprooting his kids and all of these different things. And I remember, not that I was married or had kids, but I remember thinking, if I had some savings, I have like a cushion. I can do stuff with a cushion. And at that point, I think I was probably also like, man, I can travel more if I have that. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And a few years later, I actually ended up creating a second account that became my travel account. So I would only pull money from that for travel and keep squirreling away my savings account, because I started to be more strategic with my saving at a certain point.
Excellent. And so we talk about that a lot. Everybody has goals and things they want to save for. There's no one thing to save for. So great that you connected the dots from your friend. And hopefully you've told him how much you appreciate that and how it helped you in your life. If not, you should after we finish talking today.
I think I have a text I need to send at the end of this conversation.
But to save up for whatever it is that you want, whether it's just a cushion, whether you, as you said, you started your second travel account, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to shift gears again to something else and talk about your expertise, because a big part, whether you are self-employed or you're working in a corporation, is to work really successfully in teams. And with the way that things are going, the people are working all over the world. And so the odds are that you're going to be working in a remote team at some part of your life or maybe all of it. I know I do some contract work with a big financial institution, and we've just moved to a new floor. And so there's not even enough seats for everybody. So more and more people who never worked at home are doing that just to go with the flow of it. And so really want to tap into your thoughts and expertise to help the listeners so they can be really successful in either their own enterprise or corporate to make as much money as they want to. And a key part of that, working successfully in the teams. So just to start off and kind of set the stage, based on your experience, what are the elements that make a great team?
I always sound like a broken record when I say this because it's not super mind-blowing, but communication is so key. I don't care if you're on a team, if you're in a relationship, communication is the backbone of everything. And finding out how people like to communicate and what's effective communication and doing a proper setting point inside of a team is super important. I would say the second component for an effective team is having a shared vision or result or thing, call it whatever you want, that you're working towards. If you don't feel like you're all on the same team and you're moving in the same direction, that team will fall apart really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I would say another key component of an effective team is respect. And that does not mean you have to agree with each other. I talk a lot about how understanding other people is this overlooked and not always spoken about sort of backbone of things, in the sense that I can understand and respect you and listen and ask you questions without agreeing with you. And we often think that if I'm respecting you and understanding you, that means by default I'm agreeing with you. And these things are not the same thing. And I think it's really important to have understanding and respect on a team and still be able to have another component of an effective team, healthy tension.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have some healthy tension.
Well, I think you get the best results as a team when you're challenging each other's ideas in that respectful way, and you ultimately come out with a better outcome.
That's exactly it. If everyone thinks the same thing, if you are on a team and everyone is just automatically agreeing and thinking the same thing, one of two things is happening. One, you're not going to get the best result because there's no one challenging or thinking of new ideas. Or two, people are lying and they're just going along with whatever's being said. Those are the only two things. In which case, you haven't created an environment where understanding and healthy tension can thrive. And a really effective team brings together diverse opinions, diverse people, diverse ways of thinking to create and get to the best outcome, best result, whatever the case may be.
So if you were giving some advice to either new grads or young adults out there who are already in their career or in their own business with teams to be great team players or team leaders, what advice would you share with them?
So I'm going to be honest with you. I think I'd probably give the same advice to a team player or a team leader.
Okay.
And what I would say is listen more and ask questions more rather than speaking. We all feel like our default is to feel like we want to be heard, which is great. And we all should have the opportunity to be heard. But what that means is that on a team, and this team players or team leaders often just want to get their opinion out and be heard and say their thing and have people agree with them. And if we start with listening carefully and asking questions to get to that point of understanding, we are so much more effective on the team as well as leading the team.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great piece of advice. And as I've seen it in some quotes before and some graphics, you have 2 ears and only one mouth for a reason. So
that's good. I'm going to use that one.
So to have that proportion in check, and it is really hard to always keep that in check.
Absolutely. Like I said, our default is that we want to say a thing and hear our opinion and disagree because we know inside of our head why it makes sense. And fighting that instinct in a healthy way so that you still can get to your point later on, but recognizing that starting with listening and asking questions is a much more effective strategy is really a game changer.
Excellent. And then all those elements we talked about that make up a great team, those are also the things that people should be doing. So communicating, being respectful, also disagreeing in a respectful way if they're
Yes.
not in agreement with the idea, being open to diverse people being on the team so that there is diversity in thought and better outcomes altogether.
Absolutely.
Now, when we take it one step further and we're talking about remote teams.
Yeah.
If someone is a new grad or just early in their career and they haven't been working really in a team per se, in a kind of corporate environment, what tips would you have if they're starting that journey and it starts out remote?
I love this because when I started my career and remote teams were not a thing, we had I think we called them telecommuters is what we called them back in the day. It took me a second to get there.
Yeah.
But when I started, telecommuting wasn't really a thing. And the company I worked for we had different offices. And by the second year that I was there and I'd moved teams, my team was telecommuting. We were in different locations. We had someone in Iqaluit and Nunavut. I mean, we were really all over the place. And it was my first experience on a team that was entirely in different places most of the time. Like there were exceptions. We would end up in the same place, but we were mostly in different parts of the country. And that continued until I left corporate. I did not work in the same office as my boss. In the 11 years I was in corporate, I was only working in the same office for 3 years. So I have a lot of experience in this. And it's something I'm really passionate about because I would say it is a strange experience to work on a remote team where you're not in the same place as people. And we're so lucky we have the technology and tools that we have now to make it easy and smooth and the transition simple and straightforward. So I would say a couple of tips is whatever communication tools that are available to you on that remote team, use them. If Slack is the tool that people are communicating on, get used to how it works, learn it, and use it. Because without that ongoing communication, you and other people will end up making mistakes and not having clarity on what you're working on or what's being done. I would also say that asking questions and checking your assumptions is so much more important when you're on a remote team. When you're in the same office as someone and you have an assumption or you're unsure about things, it's really easy to check with the person who sits next to you or your boss or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. When you're on a remote team, we can get carried away with our assumptions and the thoughts that we have in our head because we're more isolated or we don't have that same checkpoint. So asking questions about your assumptions specifically, getting really as much clarity as you can about any instructions that are given to you or that you're giving to someone, being really clear. And then the last thing I would say is around expectations. The expectations that we have in day-to-day interactions are different than the expectations that we have in remote interactions. And my expectations will be different than yours, for example, Tracy. Mm-hmm. And so having that conversation to say, here's how I would like this to work. Here's what you can expect from me. What do you want from me? Getting really clear on that up front makes a huge difference. And it can be uncomfortable, by the way. And I recognize this. It can be uncomfortable to be the person saying, especially if you're young and it's a new job, saying, how is this going to work? And can we get really clear on how often we communicate or how we communicate or what we communicate, what tool we communicate through, or checkpoints or whatever the case may be. But when you do that, you are going to shine so much brighter in that role because you will have real clarity. Other people have clarity and you will be able to thrive inside of that remote environment.
Well, I think that's fantastic. It reminds me of, I used to work for someone and I like to do stuff in the morning first thing, like when I get to the office. And so he was an early person and I thought, oh, that's great. I can always go and we can have our touch point right in the morning. And then I noticed after about a week that he was not really that friendly. So I asked him, I'm like, is this like not a good time for you? And he's like, no, I like to sit here and read the paper and like acclimatize to my day. And I don't like doing this right now. I should have been asking that probably in my first couple of days there, but I did clue in pretty quickly. But after that, we found a time that was mutually agreeable. He was totally engaged, worked out well, but just having that conversation up front really can change. And that's in an in-person team. So it becomes even more critical when you're in different locations.
Yeah, I agree. Most of the work that I do now is remote. I don't do a lot of work if I'm running workshops or speaking, I'm in person, obviously, but a lot of the ongoing work I do is with teams that are remote. I'm not in the same city as them. I'm not going into the same office as them. And we get really clear ahead of time how this is going to work. So they know that, they can text me these days, these hours if they need things. This is how quickly they'll get a response. If it's more formal, they can email me, but the response is it's not nearly as fast as if they send me a text message.
Mm-hmm.
They know if they're going to call me at 8:00 in the morning, I'm not going to answer. I'm not a morning person. At 8:00 in the morning, I am reading, I'm meditating, I'm not at my desk working. But they also know that if it's 7:00 at night and they need something, they can message me because I'm afternoons and evenings, I'm good. But we literally have that agreement up front to say, here's the best way of working. And so I have clients that we talk between like 11 and 1 every week or every other week because they're morning people and I am not. And that was the compromise.
Well, that's very good. And certainly people feel very confident going into work arrangements like that when they know the rules and they know what's expected of them and they're clear on what they're going to do. And it just makes it easier, kind of rules of engagement for everybody.
Absolutely. And it's important in the best of circumstances. It is so much more important on a remote team and to continue to do that check when new people join the team or there are changes. And I always suggest to people to do it at least every 6 months, if not every quarter, just to make sure that everyone's still on the same page and things are working because people change, lives change, work changes, and maybe what they thought was going to work doesn't really. Cool. Let's do a reset.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with one team I was working with last year, new people joined the team, but there wasn't like this big intro to the team, intro to how things work. And on Fridays, people generally wear jeans. So on Friday, this person who was new comes in their suit. So it's a little bit awkward because it's awkward for them. They didn't know because nobody told them. So here we are, even in the same environment, and we're not even having those. Here's how we do things around here. And just those things, it seems kind of a simple example, but can really make somebody feel part of the team or a little bit on the outside of the team.
Yes. And if I can just add to that, one of the dangers, if you will, on a remote team is that people don't feel like they're part of the same team because they are in different places, often home offices, and especially if it's one or two people who are not on the team in the same space, but everyone else is in the same space.
Yeah.
So it's a danger. And I hear about that all the time. And so I think that being very mindful of that and making the effort to include those people, whether it's through video calls, whether it's through making sure that they can call into things, whether it's through having a private chat with them on Slack or calling them every so often, but really making sure that people feel included makes a big difference. I had a team that I was part of, this was a number of years ago. Our boss was on the East Coast, and one of our project managers was on the West Coast. So it was literally Halifax or just like 2 hours outside of Halifax, and then Victoria. So we had a big time difference. It's 5 hours, I believe, memory serves, a 5-hour time difference, which meant that we were very rarely all in the same space or doing the same thing. One of the things that my boss was amazing at was making sure that she had set up a video call with all of us. There were a few people sort of in more central time, so it wasn't as big a deal. We had a video call with all of us once a month, not once a week. And during that call, it was a coffee call. So whatever time of day it was, we were all sitting on a video with a cup of coffee or tea or whatever beverage of choice. And we were just chatting like we were at a water cooler. So it was how are things, catching up, making sure that everyone felt like they were part of the same group. On top of that, she made sure that she had weekly calls set up with everyone for 30 minutes that were not only about what we were working on, that was part of it, but also a checkpoint for each of us in times that worked for us, even if it didn't work great for her, so that we felt that connection to her as well as to each other. And she did that from the beginning. And it was one of those really small things that made such a difference for everyone feeling like they were included.
Yeah, I can really see how that would bring the team together, and not doing it might not seem like a big deal, but I think then the experience on the team would be very, very different.
Absolutely. It can be. It's not always, but it can definitely be a night and day situation.
Now, when we think about working in remote teams, what are some misconceptions or some things that aren't really true that you hear from people?
So this is probably So the biggest one I hear, and I hear it all the time, is that people who are working remotely are doing less work or they're lazy.
Yeah, I would say I hear that one a lot.
I feel like I fight it all the time when I'm talking to organizations and leaders especially, because the reality is that people who work from home or working remotely are actually much more productive in less amount of time. Being in an office is really distracting and it's expensive for a company, and there's lots of reasons not to do it. I'm a big fan of remote work, not that I think everyone needs to do it, and I understand it's not always the appropriate way of doing things. And I also think there are a lot of benefits to it. The fact that you can't see someone's butt in a seat from 9 to 5 does not mean that they are not being productive. It does not mean that they are doing less work. They could be doing, and a lot of times are doing, significantly more work in 3 or 4 or 5 hours than people are doing in a 10-hour day.
Oh yeah, because just because you're in the office sitting there doesn't mean you're actually doing anything.
100%. It is the biggest ongoing misconception that I think people have, that I still have conversations around. It happens I had a conversation today. I was at a lunch meeting, and it was one of the things we were talking about was one of the people on their team wasn't in the office as much as they were expected to be. And this is a team that, by the way, touts themselves, for lack of a better word, as being remote. And I was like, oh, is this person not getting their job done? Is there a problem with their performance? No. So what's the problem?
The person who's saying it.
Right. That's just it. And they were like, they're actually doing more than the other people in this. It was like a sales role, right? They were actually doing more than the other people in the sales role. I'm like, then why do you care where they're doing it from?
And maybe more people should be working less at the office.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it still is the biggest misconception.
That's the one I thought of initially. Are there any others that you've heard, or this is the most compelling, strong one?
I'm going to say that that's the most compelling one because that's the one I always come back to. I think the other thing that comes up quite often is that, and this is like a strange one because it comes up often in certain circles, not everywhere, but that people who are working remotely, there's like a level of antisocialness or shyness or introversion or whatever the case may be, and that's why they want to do it. And that's not always the case. And I think that can prevent people from reaching out and making that effort to that person or people who are working remotely when it's a mixed team.
Okay.
And that obviously happens on mixed teams, not on fully remote teams.
Yeah.
But I would say that's the other one that I end up talking to a lot with teams that are mixed.
Well, that's good. And I mean, for a lot of people, you save a lot of energy and you are certainly more efficient if you don't have to make the commute. So we both live in Toronto, but you could be doing a commute hour and a half in the morning and in the evening. And you could either just be starting your work fresh, get it done earlier in the day, or be sitting down when people are just getting to work and you haven't had that stress of all that stuff that happened to you before that time.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to get more used to it. It's not probably my natural habitat because it hasn't been for my career, but I certainly see the benefits, and it's getting myself trained to be practiced in it and disciplined in it.
It's not for everyone. I think it's really important to recognize, and this is one of the things that I'm really passionate about, is that there's no one way that is right. Working remotely is not going to work for everyone. Working in an office is not going to work for everyone. Working on a structured schedule is not going to work for everyone. None of these things is right, and none of these things is wrong. They're just different. So how are we setting up teams and companies and opportunities and environments that are inclusive and let people thrive at their best, rather than trying to force people into a specific box that says this is the right way?
I think that's great how you frame that, because that should be the initial starting point. How would our team achieve the best results, and how would the individuals thrive? And let's try to make it that way.
Absolutely.
Very good. So I think that's great parting advice. Are there any other final pieces of advice you'd love to share with the listeners before I let you go?
Start a savings account. That would be everyone have a savings account. Do that. That would be, you never know. That would be my one piece of advice. But otherwise, no, not specifically. I'm glad that thank you for inviting me to talk about some of these things. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. So why don't you leave the listeners with what you're working on now and where they can go to learn more about you?
Absolutely. So they can go to www.revisionary.ca and learn more about me. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is a program for entrepreneurs that is part sort of mastermind and part training program to get them out there and doing what they love doing and thriving inside of that. So you're not just doing all the things, you're just doing the things that really work and get you the results you want.
Oh, that is fantastic. And just for those listening, what is a mastermind?
It's a group of people that come together on a regular basis and support each other and help each other and guide each other to work towards whatever goals they've set inside of that mastermind.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Céline, for joining me today. I know that there's a lot of great tidbits that I'm taking away with me. And so those elements of the great team that you talked about, the communication, working towards the shared vision, having that respect and that doesn't equate to agreement, being able to be comfortable with the healthy tension, and certainly bringing together diverse ways of thinking and diverse people to be on the team. Really loved your advice around listening more and asking more questions rather than just speaking and sharing your viewpoint. When it comes to remote teams and how to be successful, using whatever tools are available and really learning and figuring them out, asking your questions, checking your assumptions, because I think all too often people can get carried away on their own path. And certainly finding out what expectations are in terms of day-to-day interactions and making sure all of that works. And I love that you referenced and cleared up that misconception around people who are working remotely are doing less work and are lazy, because I do hear that regularly as well. And so really, really important that you cleared that up. I love how you shared with us your financial challenge and being a big cheerleader for starting a savings account. So thank you so much, Céline, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So there you have it, listeners. Céline Williams, international speaker, business strategist, and expert in leadership development and communication. Until next time, take good care and stay financially fit.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. To all you millionaires in the making out there, if you love this podcast, please subscribe on iTunes to keep your financial fitness training going. Oh, and leave us a review. And be sure to visit 2 S's, 2 T's, financialfitness.com to take your free financial fitness assessment. Find out how financially fit you really are. See you next week, young millionaires to be.